The acrid smell of burning fuel and metal fills the cramped interior of Panzer IV tank number 312 as it rumbles across the frozen Polish countryside in January 1943. Inside, Obergefreiter Klaus Brenner grips the controls with trembling hands, his knuckles white against the cold steel. The new synthetic fuel mixture, promised as a miracle solution to Germany's petroleum shortages, has been eating away at the tank's rubber seals for weeks, creating a toxic cloud that burns his lungs with each breath. "Something's wrong with the fuel again," mutters his gunner, Hans, wiping blood from his nose as nausea overwhelms him. The metallic taste in their mouths has become constant, a harbinger of the slow poisoning that military command refuses to acknowledge. Klaus watches his crew's deteriorating health with growing dread. Young Werner, barely 19, has developed a persistent tremor in his hands that makes operating the radio nearly impossible. Tank Commander Richter's once sharp tactical mind now struggles through a fog of confusion and headaches that leave him making dangerous decisions in combat. The wind howls across the barren landscape as their panzer battalion advances toward another engagement, unaware they're fighting a war on two fronts, against the enemy ahead and against the very machines meant to protect them. In the distance, the rumble of approaching Allied tanks mingles with the labored breathing of 300 German tank crews slowly dying from their own fuel supply. Klaus stares at the fuel gauge, knowing that each mile forward brings them closer not just to battle, but to a reckoning with the industrial negligence that has turned their armored sanctuary into a death trap. The story unfolds through Klaus's fractured memories as he drifts in and out of consciousness during a brief respite behind German lines. 3 months earlier, he had been a confident tank mechanic in the Wehrmacht's 12th Panzer Division, proud to serve alongside his childhood friend Hans and eager to prove himself under the experienced Commander Richter. The synthetic fuel program had arrived with great fanfare, a revolutionary blend of coal-derived compounds and industrial solvents that would free Germany from dependence on dwindling oil reserves. Friedrich Kellner, the chemical engineer overseeing the project, had personally assured tank crews that the new mixture was not only safe but superior to traditional petroleum. Klaus remembers the man's confident smile, his pristine uniform unmarked by the grime and oil that stained every mechanic's hands. But Klaus's memories are tainted by what came after. Werner's younger sister, Maria, had written letters filled with hope about her brother's service, letters that Klaus now reads with crushing guilt. Hans's wife was expecting their first child, a future that seems increasingly uncertain as Hans's health deteriorates with each passing day. The first signs had been subtle: persistent headaches, occasional nosebleeds, a strange metallic taste that lingered for hours. The medical officer dismissed their complaints as combat stress, prescribing rest and extra rations. But Klaus had noticed the pattern. Every crew using the new fuel reported identical symptoms, while older tanks running on hoarded petroleum remained unaffected. Commander Richter, once a mentor figure who had taught Klaus the intricacies of tank warfare, began making erratic decisions that endangered the entire unit. During their last engagement, he had ordered an unnecessary charge against fortified positions, resulting in the loss of 2 panzers and their crews. The weight of this knowledge crushes Klaus as he realizes they are trapped between duty to the fatherland and a slow death by poisoning. Each mission feels like a betrayal of the men who trust him to keep their tank running, yet refusing orders means court-martial and execution. Before we continue this harrowing journey, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from our global audience about how these universal themes of loyalty and betrayal resonate across different cultures. The synthetic fuel burns in more ways than one. As Klaus struggles with his growing awareness, a deeper web of complicity begins to unravel. His investigation into the fuel's origins reveals that Dr. Kellner had suppressed early safety reports from factory workers who developed similar symptoms during production. The chemical engineer, desperate to secure funding for his research and prove Germany's industrial superiority, had falsified test results and bribed medical inspectors to overlook concerning health data. The revelation fractures Klaus's worldview when he discovers that Commander Richter knew about the fuel's dangers weeks before Klaus himself connected the dots. Richter had received classified reports from other panzer divisions documenting crew fatalities, yet continued deploying his men with the toxic fuel mixture. His recent erratic behavior stems not just from chemical poisoning, but from the crushing guilt of knowingly sacrificing his soldiers for strategic objectives. Hans confronts Klaus after discovering hidden medical records in Richter's quarters, sparking a heated argument that shatters their lifelong friendship. Hans accuses Klaus of cowardice for not speaking out sooner, while Klaus argues that exposing the truth would only result in their execution without saving anyone. The confrontation turns physical, both men weakened by months of slow poisoning, ending with Hans unconscious and bleeding on the frozen ground. Meanwhile, young Werner has been secretly documenting their symptoms in letters to his sister Maria, who works as a nurse in Berlin. Her connections in the medical community have revealed that factory workers producing the synthetic fuel have been dying at alarming rates, deaths systematically covered up by industrial officials. Werner's letters become increasingly desperate as he realizes the scope of the conspiracy reaches the highest levels of military command. The unit's medic, Sergeant Müller, emerges as an unlikely ally when he admits to falsifying health reports under direct orders from superior officers. His own son serves in another panzer division, and Müller's conscience finally breaks when he learns that unit has suffered 3 crew deaths from mysterious combat fatigue, the official euphemism for fuel poisoning fatalities. A pivotal moment arrives when Klaus intercepts radio communications revealing that Dr. Kellner is scheduled to visit their forward position to inspect fuel efficiency. The scientist's arrival presents an opportunity for justice, but also forces Klaus to choose between personal revenge and protecting his remaining crew members. The decision becomes more complex when Werner reveals that Maria has threatened to expose the conspiracy to Allied intelligence if her brother doesn't survive the war. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us continue bringing these powerful historical stories to life. Trust dissolves like synthetic fuel through corroded seals. The final confrontation erupts during a desperate winter engagement against advancing Soviet T-34 tanks near Stalingrad's outskirts. Kellner has arrived with a film crew to document the superior performance of his synthetic fuel, unaware that Klaus has orchestrated events to expose the conspiracy during live documentation. As the battle begins, Richter's deteriorating mental state reaches a breaking point. He orders the panzer formation into an exposed position, directly contradicting established tactical doctrine. Klaus realizes his commander is experiencing a complete psychological collapse, alternating between lucid moments of military brilliance and confused episodes where he mistakes Soviet tanks for retreating German vehicles. Hans, still bitter from their confrontation but unable to abandon his crew, takes over gunnery operations as Werner's trembling hands can no longer operate the targeting mechanisms effectively. The young radio operator's condition has worsened dramatically, his nose bleeds continuously, and his speech has become slurred and incoherent. During the height of the engagement, Klaus makes a devastating choice. Rather than continue fighting with the toxic fuel that's killing his crew, he deliberately sabotages their tank's fuel system, causing a controlled leak that forces them to withdraw from combat. The decision saves his men's lives but appears cowardly to the filming crew, potentially destroying his military reputation forever. Kellner, furious at the perceived mechanical failure that undermines his demonstration, demands Klaus explain the fuel system malfunction. In a moment of raw courage, Klaus reveals the full extent of the poisoning, presenting Werner's documented symptoms and Müller's falsified medical reports while the cameras continue rolling. The confrontation becomes a three-way battle as Kellner attempts to destroy the evidence. Richter oscillates between supporting his subordinate and following orders to silence him, and Klaus fights to protect the truth that could save hundreds of tank crews. Hans, finally understanding the depth of Klaus's moral struggle, chooses loyalty to his friend over military hierarchy. The climax reaches its peak when Werner collapses from acute poisoning during the filmed confrontation. As Kellner frantically tries to stop the documentation, claiming the boy's condition results from battle fatigue, Klaus forces the scientist to examine Werner's bloody vomit and neurological symptoms firsthand. The moment of truth arrives when Kellner, faced with undeniable evidence of his fuel's lethality, must choose between admitting his deadly mistake or watching a 19-year-old boy die to protect his reputation. Soviet artillery begins targeting their position as the moral and physical battles converge into a single moment of absolute chaos. The aftermath of the battlefield confrontation reverberates through both personal lives and military hierarchy with devastating consequences. Werner survives his acute poisoning episode but suffers permanent neurological damage that ends his military service and haunts him for decades. His sister Maria, armed with the filmed evidence and her brother's medical documentation, becomes a key witness in post-war investigations that expose the synthetic fuel scandal's true scope. Klaus faces court-martial for sabotage and insubordination, but the filmed evidence creates an impossible situation for military prosecutors. Kellner's desperate attempts to suppress the documentation backfire when Soviet intelligence intercepts the recordings and broadcasts them as propaganda, forcing German command to address the scandal publicly. The chemical engineer disappears during the chaos of Germany's retreat, leaving behind only a suicide note that admits to falsifying safety data and accepting responsibility for 300 crew deaths. Commander Richter's fate proves most tragic. The accumulated brain damage from months of fuel poisoning triggers a complete mental breakdown during his testimony at Klaus's court-martial. His confused, rambling testimony reveals the full extent of command complicity in the cover-up, implicating senior officers who had prioritized strategic fuel independence over soldier safety. Richter spends his final years in a military psychiatric facility, occasionally lucid enough to understand the magnitude of his failures as a leader and protector of his men. Hans struggles with survivor's guilt and the physical aftermath of chemical exposure. His son is born with developmental complications that doctors attribute to paternal toxin exposure, creating a living reminder of the war's invisible casualties. The friendship between Hans and Klaus requires years of careful rebuilding, complicated by Hans's resentment over Klaus's initial silence and Klaus's guilt over his friend's suffering. The broader investigation reveals that over 300 tank crew members died or suffered permanent disability from the synthetic fuel program. Factory workers who produced the chemicals experienced similar casualty rates, but their deaths were systematically attributed to industrial accidents or combat-related stress. The conspiracy involved dozens of military and civilian officials who prioritized propaganda victories over human lives. Klaus emerges from his court-martial with a suspended sentence but carries the weight of his delayed moral courage for the rest of his life. His post-war testimony helps establish compensation programs for affected families, though no amount of money can restore the lives destroyed by institutional negligence and willful blindness. The fuel scandal becomes a case study in how technological ambition combined with wartime desperation can transform protective systems into instruments of destruction. The tank crews who trusted their machines to shield them from enemy fire never imagined that their greatest threat would come from within their own fuel tanks. Werner's documented letters to his sister become historical evidence of how ordinary soldiers recognized and reported systematic poisoning while their superiors ignored or suppressed their concerns. In the quiet decades following the war, Klaus returns to his hometown workshop, repairing civilian machinery with hands that still remember the feel of tank controls and the weight of impossible choices. Werner visits occasionally, his tremor now permanent but his spirit unbroken, carrying letters from families of other tank crews who found peace through Klaus's eventual courage to speak truth to power. The small memorial Klaus builds in his workshop bears no official recognition, just 300 names etched into salvaged tank steel, a reminder that heroism sometimes requires challenging the very institutions we serve. Hans's son grows up healthy despite early concerns, becoming a chemical engineer dedicated to industrial safety, transforming his father's suffering into protection for future generations. Maria's nursing career becomes a lifelong mission to advocate for soldier health, her brother's documented letters inspiring medical protocols that prioritize human welfare over military expediency. The filmed evidence that Klaus risked everything to preserve ultimately saves thousands of lives by exposing systematic negligence and establishing precedents for wartime medical ethics. The synthetic fuel scandal demonstrates how technological progress without moral oversight can transform tools of protection into instruments of destruction. These tank crews' sacrifice reminds us that the greatest battles are sometimes fought not against external enemies, but against the willingness to sacrifice human dignity for strategic advantage. Their story echoes through history whenever institutions prioritize propaganda over people, whenever technology advances faster than ethical consideration, whenever ordinary individuals must choose between comfortable silence and dangerous truth. Klaus, Hans, Werner, and their brothers-in-arms paid the ultimate price to learn that protecting each other requires protecting the truth, even when that truth threatens everything we believe about our cause. Ready for more powerful historical stories that reveal the human cost behind the headlines? Subscribe to our channel for deep dives into the forgotten heroes who faced impossible choices in humanity's darkest hours. Like this video if their story moved you, and share it to honor the memory of those who sacrificed everything for truth. What other untold stories from history's shadows would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments below.